Yeah, I'm Alwin. I'm now CPO of a startup for, let's say, a few weeks only. So, and then Dan requested me, who is a long-term friend, to also keep this clear here, and requested me if I could jump into your show and talk a little bit about how I became CPO. So my, let's say, obligation or my ideas then would be more everything before that. So
Yeah, I mean, it's the journey you've taken. So when we first met, you were, I want to say just a developer. You were an engineer. Yeah, yeah. But you've had a very, very interesting journey over the last few years. I think a lot of our listeners are going to find quite interesting.
Before we go on, what
Yeah.
is a CPO? What does CPO stand for?
it's the Chief Product Officer. So basically, I'm the one who is in the end responsible for the overall product in our company. And of course, there are multiple parts then. It's not just, let's say, the classic product management. It's also, let's say, a lot more into the business area and also about, let's say, product strategy, product marketing, yeah, and everything all leads together here. And this is, let's say, in the shortest version, yeah, I get to know till now what my role as a CPO is. And yeah.
So it's been quite a long way since you were developing, just doing tickets. You were head of product before you took on the CPO role.
Yes.
So just walk us through a little bit of your journey in the last, say, 8 or 9 years.
Well, I think, let me think about, my daughter is now 10, so it's around 11 years. I'm working in this industry, and yeah, so I started as a developer because, let's say, after I quit my study, I said, okay, I have to do something with my life. So becoming a developer was, let's say, the easiest entrance to earn some decent money. And of course, I had some experience there, but not too much. So yeah, I found someone who hired me as a developer, knowing that I am not a developer already. And let's say, who gave me the chance to perform there. And it was also a startup, which, let's say, basically will guide me through the next 10 years through my career. So I always worked only in startups. Let's say everything is maybe a little bit startup biased, which I'm telling you. But yeah, I think that was really a good career start for me because it's not so much about, let's say, your graduation or so. It's more about those things you bring to the table and the things you deliver. And after a few years, I thought, yeah, okay, software development is fine. But I always had the feeling that I'm a little bit late to the party when it comes to deciding on what we are actually doing and stuff. So I found out that, let's say, if you don't want to be late to the party on what we are doing, you have to be a product manager. Yeah, so I got the chance to transition over there. So I was part of my career was half-time a developer, half-time product manager. More and more it got clear to me that, let's say, the product management role is something I really want to do. And then after a few years, I got, let's say, my first small team where we basically were responsible for not only product management, also, let's say, we called it technical solutions, so which is basically also, let's say, small products which are, let's say, customer-centric or, let's say, not only for specific customers. And after this, I was this quiet for a while. And then in my last startup I worked before, I became, how was it called? It was a super fancy startup title, Principal Product Evangelist.
Eventually, okay, yeah.
I never found out what this actually really means because I just was it for a few months and then the startup got broke. So
well, you weren't a very good
evangelist about that.
Yeah.
Let's say the idea here was, and this is something which we also see in the industry for all the jokes here, which I think would be really something important in the next years, is let's say that we have these two paths of management and the other path is really being this individual contributor. Yeah, so these principal roles, I think this is something which we will see much, much more in the future. Yeah, but never got the chance to really do it because after, I think, 8 weeks, then the startup was broke. So, but luckily...
Very short innings.
during that time, I was already in the recruiting process for the actual company I'm working for, Sosteco. It's a 100% startup from Bosch itself. So it's basically a mix between corporate and startup, which sounded really interesting for me. And and there I became the head of product. And I was this now for 1 year. And for a few weeks ago, I got the promotion to be the CPO of Sosteco.
Congratulations.
Nice.
Thank you.
I think that's a super interesting journey from the perspective of some of our listeners who are maybe, I don't know, a few weeks into a boot camp. Maybe they've been graduated for a while now. Because I think at the beginning, there's a lot of misconception around like, I have to pick a path and then I stick on that path, and you can move certainly within the startup ecosystem horizontally whilst moving vertically quite a lot.
Yeah, it depends if you're, let's say, enjoying that. Yeah, so of course, let's be honest, working in a startup is always chaotic. And this is something where I have to be comfortable with, which is a lot of times super stressful. But on the other hand, I think, let's say, at least for myself, it gave me always more opportunities to really develop my own career. Because there's always, let's say, a lack of experienced people in the startup itself. Because let's say there are a lot of new starters and so on. And therefore, let's say you get easier the chance to actually lead something, to step in, to take over task, and to really bring your commitment there to the point. At least if you have a startup where you get these chances. In my career, it was always the case. But of course, you have to also then sometimes do, let's say, the shitty task, which no one wants to do. But let's say it's always a good opportunity to jump in there and do something great out of it.
And with that in mind, are there any lessons that you've kind of like pulled through from your days as a dev right through your product journey as well? Or do you see
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's, let's say, basically it helped me in so many cases. And I hope that the developers and engineers I'm working on right now also have this feeling, because it is a difference if you, let's say, know the pain, and also, but it's how it is. Yeah. So if they tell you, hey, we have to do a database migration, that's always nasty to do. Yeah. Or, for example, we have to introduce a user management, all these standard things, which basically is nothing where you, let's say, would sell a product more. But you have to have them, and they are work. Yeah. And they are really a lot of work if you do it right. And therefore, this really, really helped me to understand this. Also, let's say, how development processes are going. Yeah. So also these uncertainty, if you do something new, sometimes you stumble something over it, which is, let's say, more work than you expected in the beginning, and which is quite a common thing. But I think it's always easier if you're working in a team where everyone is acknowledging that and not saying, hey, why is it taking longer than expected? And so that is basically what really helped me a lot to understand the challenges of engineers and to also acknowledge that.
That was actually my next question about how much your starting in engineering helped you when you moved into product, because it's still very close to development. But were there any kind of unexpected skills? Because, for example, obviously in product and specifically in leadership roles, it's a lot more communicative than you would need to be just as a developer, as an individual contributor. So is there anything in that realm that maybe was a bit unexpected that's helped you a lot?
Maybe I have the wrong impression, but I always have the feeling that if you have a common technical language, you speak to each other, this is more important than you would think of. At least I did that in the beginning, because it's shorten up so many things. Yeah, it makes communication clearer. They don't, let's say, basically have to break down a technical language which they use in tickets or, let's say, whatever in any discussion that is going on to make it understandable for you. And I think this is, let's say, something I definitely underestimated how much of an advantage this could be. And that's something which I really enjoy.
Something that I found actually in the last few weeks, actually talking to developers about tickets that we were writing up. A colleague of mine asked me a very similar question, And I was saying one of the things is that you're a lot more forgiving around developers wanting to do things right as opposed to fast. I think when you haven't been a dev, you just think, oh, just do it. Just get it out of the way. Just get it done. But I think with the sort of dev hat on, you want to get it right and you want to do it in a process that's going to be like, you can use it again in the future and the code is clean and all that kind of thing. So that's quite a valuable part, I feel, anyway, as well.
Definitely. But on the other hand, let's say it's also, I think, in the responsibility of a product manager to give clear guidelines how good something has to be. Yeah. So not every refactoring is at any time correct. Yeah. So, and let's say, it is not that don't think that refactoring is necessary. I was a developer. I know that this is, let's say, also especially if you want to scale up teams or so, it's really, really needed. But on the other hand, yeah, so there has to be some guidelines for them how good something needs to be, and let's say how much effort you need to put into that.
Yeah.
But this also, let's say, in my opinion, has to be, let's say, a fair discussion between product management, technical leads, and so on. And if you make this, let's say, understandable for everyone, they are the last ones who want to do, let's say, unnecessary refactoring. Yeah, but you need to set the guidelines that you say, okay, cool, then we don't need that. Yeah, so they are happy to leave something behind if they know that you're not coming back 2 months later and saying, hey, okay, now we need this in a super sophisticated version. Oh, wait, you don't have it? Yeah, so, and this is something also, I think, let's say, for product management, you also should be in a situation that let's say, how good specific parts and services are of, for example, of your backend, in which shape they are. Yeah. So this is something which we can roll out, which is scalable. This is something where we just did a POC, for example, or whatever. And so that you have this in your head also if you're doing product management. Yeah. So just because it works on the UI doesn't mean that anything behind that, is clean and ready to scale up. Yeah. So at least in my teams, yeah. So maybe there are other teams around who do this everything perfectly, but I would have my doubts. Yeah. But then it makes, let's say, a quite cool relation. Yeah. So that if you know that, and they will absolutely acknowledge the engineers, then say, okay, wait, this wasn't in the best shape. We also maybe need to plan in some refactoring if we revisit that. And also on the other hand, I think it's really important that you say that you keep your promises. Yeah. So if you say, hey, we have gonna have time to refactor it later, you have to stick to that. Yeah. And I myself make notes that I don't forget it. Because let's say nothing is more, let's say, trust breaking than saying, yeah, you get later time for it. And I say, oh no, surprise, don't. Yeah. So yeah, but it's not, let's say, unrealistic that this happens. And so it's why I say, let's say, you have to keep your promises if you say, yeah, we have later on to refactor.
That's good. That's good advice for juniors as well. If you're, to sort of like to keep an eye on that kind of thing, and like to point out where if the code might need refactoring, or to think, well, this fits purpose now, but maybe in the future it might need to be improved. It's good to keep an eye on those things, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So,
with that in mind, are there any other processes that you see that differ between startups and larger enterprises, large-ish enterprises?
Yeah, large-ish.
Large-ish.
Slightly larger enterprise. Yeah.
Yeah. So
you mentioned about the scaling up part.
Yeah,
that's obviously good. Maybe a bit of a difference, but
I think there, let's say, basically are two things. Yeah. Also, startups has to be, or especially startups, have to be in a position to scale up. Yeah. So maybe even more than enterprises. And let's say it's hard for me to say because I don't think that, let's say, it is such a big difference when it comes to, let's say, code quality and so on. You maybe have to, let's say, household a bit more with your resources on what can be in a perfect shape. Yeah. So what I discovered in the last year that there was, let's say, more resources if you work in a bigger company to keep things, let's say, more in shape than you maybe would do in a startup. Yeah. So it would be, okay, fine enough, works. Let's go next topic because we have to say stuff ready.
Is it just people like that count as the resource here, or is it just, runway to keep things going?
I think it's not only runway, yeah. So it's more like this kind of work, which you discover that it is more okay, for example, for a startup team to leave stuff behind them and revisit it later. But yeah, I think it's really hard to evaluate this, because in the end, if you want to do a great product, it doesn't make a difference if you're from a startup team or, let's say, a corporate team. It has to be a good product, and it has to be, in any case, scalable.
Yeah. I mean, so do you think, though, that coming from like a dev background, it's the technical knowledge that makes you a better product manager, or do you think now you just focus more on strategic planning?
Yeah, as I said before, I think that's definitely a good skill to understand the language, to understand the problems, to acknowledge the problems. But on the other hand, what I discovered doing my product manager role is there's not only the engineer side you have to talk to, there's also the business side you have to talk to. Yeah, so you're basically this 360 person in the middle who has to explain in every direction everything. Yeah, so you have to explain to the engineer why we need this feature now and why is it available, and why we need it only, for example, in a specific case or in a specific scope. And on the other hand, you have to also to take to the business teams and say, okay, great idea what the customer wants, but if we do that, this costs us, let's say, X amount of money. And I think this is something which you really have to have in your head, that you always need to, let's say, at least have a roughly calculation how much it costs to do something. And because what usually happens, at least it happens to me, that there are, let's say, requests on, let's say, what could we do and why don't we have, let's say, this fancy AI feature. Usually it is, most teams are capable of doing a lot of stuff, but it's a question of resources and costs if you want to invest it in them. And this is what I mean, that you have to calculate in your head, because it's a way easier discussion if you go to sales and say, hey, we can do this, but it costs us 200,000 euros. Is the customer worth it? And then they probably think around, and if it's really worth it, okay, then let's do it. Yeah, but if not, then you come way easier to the point that you say, okay, we do it only to this grade, and then we hope that it's fine or good enough.
Yeah. Why don't we have this fancy AI feature is definitely something I've been hearing a lot in the last year. You know, especially with like process workflow automation.
Yep. I don't want to talk too much about AI now, but let's say it will have a significant effect on how teams working. Yeah. So this is something we already see, and especially for product management, I don't think that if, for example, let's say the typical, or what we see a lot of times, are these team structures that you have a product manager, if you are a developer, a designer, and then this is basically the team, and let's go. And it's like, say, these 5 to 8 people teams. I don't think that this will be the future. Yeah, I think really that it will tremendously scale up the development side, and that you as a product manager are responsible for way more than just a few developers. And yeah, so that's going to be interesting.
Oh man, I'm in a 5-person team. I hope that doesn't get shared too soon.
So on that topic of getting that balance right, do you find that you come down on one side or the other? Is it always a balancing job? Is it kind of like the mission statement of the team? You know, how do you kind of guide those decisions around business needs versus technical feasibility? And how do you think that engineers can have that, you know, kind of in the back of their mind as they sort of join the workforce?
To be honest, I don't think that this is something where, let's say, engineers need too much to make their head around about the business side. Yeah, what I mean with that, not that they should, let's say, blindly build something, but let's say it is, in my opinion, the job of a product manager to break a feature into something which we can afford, into something which is concretely doable, and then hand it over to the developers or to the engineers. Yeah, and not. I think, let's say, that's also maybe a problem about this, let's say, a Scrum thing, and so it's sometimes a bit difficult to really see, let's say, a big feature on how much it costs us in the end, and if you really want to do it. But let's say if you have this a bit clearer in the beginning of the process, yeah, to have a clearer requirement engineering, clear refinement for user stories and so on, it really helps you then basically to have a clear scope for the development process so that they in the end don't have to bother too much about, are we doing the right thing? That's exactly part of the product management, I think, in my opinion, that they should basically put this aside and say, okay, I cleared everything else. We have the money, we have a clear scope, just go and do the things where you are experts in. Yeah, and this is something which I think is really important.
Well, there's been a bit of a theme around scaling, how to build things scalable. In your 11-year now career in startups, do you have any insights on really efficient scaling rules of thumb, for an expression, as in a rule of thumb, like something that can kind of fit any situation for scaling?
Does that
Which I know is a hard question.
Yeah, so maybe not sure if I understand it correctly, but let's say what I see is one major thing a team has to achieve before they really go, let's say, for example, in a really big scale phase. For example, they close a big financing round, and then let's say a lot of money is suddenly around, and then, okay, what do we do with it? I think one really important thing is that everyone really understands what the product is doing. Because it helps you so much in all these small decisions, which are, let's say, engineering teams doing, sales team doing. And I've been in a lot of teams in my career where, let's say, of course, the product management knew what the product is about. Okay, they are building it. But let's say the farther you go away from them, the less they knew about it. But to really make, in my opinion, successful scaling, there has to be really product knowledge through the whole company, and even the working students. I still do it today. That, let's say, if working students, for example, joining our team, someone of the product management team, and sometimes even me, sit down with them, explain them explicitly what we do here. Because then they see also, okay, this is the way we want to run. And then they can do all the small decisions way more effectively than just being, let's say, the small wheel and doesn't really know about what's happening here. And this is, in my opinion, something which I saw really helped because then you get them all together and they're actually running in the same direction and not basically, oh, cool, now we have money, let's do this 20 fancy projects. Yeah, so, and that helps really to have a clear product vision, which gives the guidelines here also.
What advice would you have for those working students and fresh grads who want to future-proof their careers? Is that part of is it sort of like communication upstream? Is that part of the advice you give, or is there anything else?
Yeah, so we are talking about working students who are in product management, or we are talking about working students who are engineers?
Newcomers in general. Let's stay engineering.
Yeah,
okay.
Tech transit.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so first of all, do own private projects. Why do I say that? Because I know university is always great and so on, and you, of course, do some decent coding there. But the really good engineers as working students I saw had a pretty cool GitHub repository, and they showed us and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. These were usually way better than the ones who were, let's say, doing only the university part. Yeah, so do your own project, because it's a difference if you're just figuring out a specific coding challenge, or if you're setting up a project, yeah, getting to know all this hustle which is around that to get something running. What happens if there is, let's say, an update in the framework? What do I have to do then? And this is basically would be my advice. Do your own private projects. Collect them all in one GitHub repository. Don't hesitate to bring this to a table if you want to have a job. Yeah, so the people know that you're not just a working student. That does sound mean now, yeah, but that you're not, let's say, have years of experience. And so bring this to the table, let them see how you work on stuff. And that tells you so much more than any CV if someone brings her or his GitHub repository to the table and say, okay, that's how I program.
Interesting.
So to move to the more product side, what if someone wants to move into product? Let's say a developer is thinking about following in the same kind of path you did. Mm-hmm. Where do they start to move bilaterally into product?
Yeah. So of course, it always depends on the company where you are. Yeah. So if you have the possibility to maybe in where you are actually working on to get a foot into product management, this of course is, let's say, the easiest way. Yeah. So that you can lead small projects or something, or we do product management. But on the other hand, what I really think to, basically get also in product management is the same with this all small own projects, is to think them really through. Yeah. So to really, for example, if you get a ticket, look up what is the epic above it. Yeah. So how is this all structured together? Yeah. Get your head up from the daily work and see, okay, where is this working together? How is this making, let's say, an advantage for our business? Why are we doing that? And usually, hopefully, there are other product managers around which you at least can ask. And I think this is basically the first thing. Yeah? Get your head up from the coding task itself and see how they work on a bigger scale.
Do you think you sort of glossed over the company part there? Do you think that's important for juniors? Is it just get your hands dirty wherever you can, or do you think picking a company is important?
Depends on the team, yeah. So I think a company itself doesn't tell you anything, and I think, let's say, for example, the team where I'm working on right now is really good in communication and respect for communication. Yeah, so I think, for example, toxic work conditions are also having a big effect on the product itself. Yeah, it is never as good as teams who are working unified on one product, and therefore this is something where I would be always careful if you have the gut feeling, okay, that's quite a harsh and rough culture, beside of, let's say, actual getting, let's say, an argument about facts or whatever. Yeah, so that's fine. Yeah, and this is part of the game. Yeah, so there should be a situation that you can fight about the product itself, and it should be a hard discussion, and not because someone with a higher title is coming in and saying, "Hey, let's make this button here blue." There should always be a discussion that they said, "Okay, why? Yeah, and why don't we make it green?" Yeah, so this has to be challenged, but it has to be in a respectful way. And this is something I think which you, let's say, also get a feeling if you're on interviews. And so what kind of work culture do they have, and how do they, let's say, work with each other? And this is, I think, absolutely my advice, because imagine you're doing 40 hours a week. Yeah, so you probably see your colleagues more than your family. Don't spend your time with assholes. Yeah, so that's absolutely number one advice.
Good advice.
I mean, so you're saying you can have an amazing, well-known logo of a company, but an awful team.
Absolutely. Especially in the beginning of a career, it doesn't make. So you want to learn something, and you don't want to have, let's say, this one company in your CV which tells you something. Yeah, there's enough time later on to do that.
Yeah.
But get the skills.
I feel like Lego is the gold standard. I don't know about you guys, but I've never heard anyone work at Lego and not enjoy it. Have you never?
They all just fit together, don't they?
I think, you know why? I think because what Alvin was just saying then about, like, imagine having tough product decisions at Lego, and it's like, look, this Harry Potter Lego set should be like, no, make it blue. You know?
To be honest, I don't know anyone who is working at Lego.
Yeah, I know I know it sounds completely left field, but I know 3 people in my career now who have either gone on to or have past worked at Lego, either in the research and development department or in the product department, and just no end of like, oh, it's an amazing company, everyone's like impressive, really, you loads of room to design stuff, and it's like, all right, I mean, pretty safe, company. Yeah.
Not sure how many engineers they have.
Yeah, well, that's true. I don't know why it sparked something in me then when you were talking about arguing over product decisions, and I was just thinking, I wonder what that's like at a company like that,
Yeah, but let's say on the other hand, so for example, I'm working in an industry which is super niche, yeah. So it's about buildings and energy consumption of buildings, which is, let's be honest, super boring on the one hand, at least if you're not an expert in it, and then it gets more and more interesting. But I really enjoy that, and being there in a niche which has such a big influence of everyone's life. And on the other hand, let's say, is, for example, not the one which is, let's say, the leading star when it comes to development or whatever.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So don't hesitate to go into the boring industries. If you have a great team, that's way better than anything else.
Good advice.
Well, speaking of advice, though, I do want to ask one thing about your career in the past. It's a bit of a big question. But if there was anything you could do differently or any piece of advice you would give to yourself when you were younger, moving forward, through development into product, what would that be?
It's hard to say. So what I definitely also said before, having own projects collected in one repository, which you can show off, doing these own projects a bit more earlier, I think that would definitely help myself. But let's say that would be, the one advice I would have to myself. Do your own projects earlier and collect them in your own GitHub repository. But that's would be, it's always hard to say, because who am I to judge? I have a great job. I have a great team around me, probably the best team I ever had. And so in the end, it worked out. That's
okay. Fair. Good point. Yeah, good point. All right. So if anyone wants to reach out or connect with you, ask any questions, how can they do that?
Just find me on LinkedIn. That's the only social media network I'm using, and probably the best. And tell me that you're, coming from this podcast and not the next recruiter or the next agency who wants to sell me something.